Hello and welcome to Sage Thyme. Lillian here with you today as I touch upon the pulse of the collective, listen in for archetypal energies influencing the collective, and offer a narrative for you to personally translate and assimilate, all in accordance to your divine design. And so today was an interesting day. I have been feeling such a magnanimous, well, that's a great word, Spirit, thank you. A magnanimous pull to offer a video today. And as I wanted to do one, as I've been doing lately, that has kind of extracts ideas and philosophies, healing modalities, and so forth from different resources and books. I let the books speak, and whatever knowledge or wisdom I might have from my past research and studies, as well as what Spirit has to say. And there was so much information coming in from Spirit from a few different directions that it was simply just too much information. As beautiful as it all was and is, I'm recognizing the art of allowing information to percolate. So when something comes in a download form, and or it has that sensation of, for those of you who are writers or artists that draw and paint, for me as a writer, it has that sensation of inspiration to write. And I'll sit down to start writing it all and it stops. But when I stop writing and I simply listen, the information, the dialogue, it can come in as a dialogue, it can come in as poetry, it can come in as a story. It just floods through. And I have learned that those are the moments when Spirit says, please just listen. And I don't always have to be still. Sometimes that is required. It can often be doing chores or playing in the garden or simply playing. Dancing around the house. I like to dance around the house to get the energies moving and flowing within my body and around the house. Those stagnant energies, and the exercise doesn't hurt either. So I'm not sure why. Well, I do know why. That was an unexpected share, and it always comes out for a reason. So it does seem to fit with the cards that I drew. I felt the best way to let Spirit energies prioritize what needs to be said today is to let the cards fly out and see what they have to say when there's that much information. So a few different formats came out today. I am pulling cards from the Shaman's Dream deck, and I shuffled for cards from the Virtues Reflection cards, a deck that I found from a million years ago. And 3 cards came out, and those came out actually together at once, and we'll go through that. And then Rumi actually spoke, and an interesting poem popped forward that is a bit riddly, a bit riddle me. So I'll read that in the end. So that can be something that you can take time and space with. And we'll see what else might come through. So here's the 4 cards that came through from the Shaman's Dream. I'd like to show them to you first. So one on top of the other here was the Covenant, Sacred Contract, and Deep Quiet, Meditation and Stillness. And then on either side of those 2 cards that came out was the Fool's Embrace and Me Talks. Fool's Embrace, transmuting pain. Me Talks, repairing the body, mind, and spirit. I feel like this is something that is not new for many of the listeners, and at the same time is coming in a new way, as well as I have been hearing and feeling a new wave of initiates into, we'll say, the transmuting pain, the sensitivity to collective collective experiences, not strictly just emotions and thoughts, but experiences, and coming in a heightened, more highlighted, illuminated way that for those of you who have been doing this for a while, recognize can be incredibly overwhelming, and there's, in a sense, nowhere to hide when it comes to that. And for those of you who have been doing this transmuting pain for a long time, and when I say that, I'm talking years at a heightened, overwhelming level, the new wave coming in is helping to lighten not the intensity of it, but lighten the load of it in a way that is allowing each tier of individual that does this work and is entering this work more a training ground of refinement in these skills. Thank you, Spirit. That's exactly it. So I was trying to pull from these cards what was really trying to be said, and that is it in a nutshell. And I'm slurring a little bit, so that's confirmation. Funny way to confirm, right? So there is an upgrade in the refinement of skills. And when there comes an upgrade, there comes in more challenge. And with more challenge comes in both more support, teachers, guides, so forth. And within that, more depth and, excuse me, the sirens are a little distracting for a second. I usually don't do readings this late in the afternoon, but it's working out that way, and there's a lot of noise today. As the sun is in Aries. That's another piece that's been really wanting to talk. So that actually comes into this too. Forgive the jump, but with the sun entering Aries and soon to follow Mercury, and there's a number of other aspects coming in with Aries, but it is Aries season for the next month approximately. And Aries comes through in a lot of ways. Jupiter's already in Aries, and it's hanging out near Eris, the brother to Mars, and Eris being typically known as the goddess of war. Aries, of course, being a sign that has to do, it's the first sign of the zodiac, and it's the sign of personification, the personality self, claiming and or exhibiting, projecting it, and which is an important thing. The ego self is an important aspect of being a human and learning the many different human processes. And on the lower level energetic frequency of those aspects, if we lose ourselves in the playwright, in the script, in the act, and we forget that we're actually on stage and that we're playing a role, and we lose ourselves in the role, then we lose ourselves to the lessons. The lessons start taking over us rather than us being the observer of the lesson itself. So that comes in with the covenant, the sacred contract. In one sense, working with the current Aries season right now, we're both being opportuned with a heightened sense of getting lost, or is addicted the right word? Attached to a personality role, a character role. So we run a risk of that, but that is the gem of the lesson. By heightening a character role, energetically, the archetypes will do that. That's Jupiter's famous for that, exacerbating and heightening or enlarging the words, they're very funny today. Wherever Jupiter is. And so here Jupiter's in Aries saying, isn't it great to be ... Isn't it great to be a good person? Isn't it great to be a healthy person? Isn't it great to be a prosperous, successful, fill in the blank? I mean, those are the real general ones, but there's many others. Isn't it great to be a parent? Isn't it great to be a lover, a partner, a spiritual leader, a recluse, quiet and still and peaceful with nature? Isn't it great to be? And while yes, it is, it's not who we are. It's simply a role and a character. We are all the things that there is of all the time. And we put on these different hats and we wear these different cloaks, and we do them so that we, at the higher level, the soul self, can learn and experience them. But don't forget, you, the actor, the soul self, are playing a role of experiential. And that's the contract. And when we submerge ourselves and allow ourselves to get lost in it, the sign of Pisces, we then will ignite and infuse ourselves with greater depths of that character role. So if, for an example, what do I want to use? Spiritual leader, right? That's a big thing right now. Well, we all know what can happen when the once downtrodden person that has succumbed to incredible adversities, because that was just the cards that they were dealt, but he climbs up and pulls himself through and somehow makes it through the impossible and pulls all these gems of wisdom and peace and simplicity and humility and this humble, gentle, gracious nature, and he pulls that forward and recognizes, of course, to come down from the mountain is to share. And it is all well and good to stay in the cave, but eventually it is time to come back down from the mountain and share what Spirit has imbued us with in our hermit stage. And so we do that. And so the boy that's now a man, or the girl that's now a woman, comes down from the mountain and shares with the people. And maybe at first is shunned and persecuted, or so forth. Or maybe after a while or right away is welcomed. Wow, you speak so eloquently. You resonate so purely and truly. Well, of course, she's been in the cave and in the mountain, and he's been, submerged and drowning in the depths of the cosmic seas. So of course there is. And if the sage loses his remembering into himself that he is the actor on a play wearing a hat as a sage, he is not simply a sage. She is not simply a wise woman. She is all of the things that there all the characteristics. Then the sage starts to become so identified that the shadow starts to seep through, we'll say. And there's a lot of ways that can be thought of and seen. And again, I think it's important to recognize that that shadow that seeps through and comes through is just as important as the light and the wisdom, because now the sage is in a new era of balance, reflection, repose, testing humility, recognizing lack of arrogance in the place of, and things like that, which is again a new level of acquisition of greater embodiment of self, spirit self. And with that, to not succumb to the popularity as a sage, let's say, becomes popular is, I just lost myself. I think I said that wrong. So to succumb, we'll say, to the popularity and to bask in that, or deny that one is basking in it, and stay humble out of willfulness. It doesn't necessarily mean it's false pretense, even though it can shake out that way, but so determined to not be vulnerable to the shadow side of being popular and adored and admired and revered. To ignore that or push it down or deny it actually is to allow it to deepen its hooks and deepen its roots, just like a weed will do when there's a drought. Have you ever noticed a dandelion? You can pull it up quite gently and easily all the way from the tips of the root in the wet of the spring. But you get midsummer around late July and you try to pull that dandelion root in, and it's dug down so deep and spread out and gone under concrete and everything. It's nearly impossible, definitely improbable to get that out. And that's what happens when we deny the wholeness of who we are, when we deny the light of who we are, and when we deny the dark of who we are. But when we allow ourselves to both recognize that there are not only polarities of a character role, the sage again, we'll use as the example, that there's not only a yin and a yang, a darkness and a light, and again, not a good and a bad. I want to really step away from that definition because that can be applied on both sides, as I mentioned before. When we do that, though, and we allow those polarities to become visible to our own inner self within a reflective sense of who was I today and what was I really about, and seeing all sides of it without blame, without shame, without exaltation, simply an equanimous reverence of reflection and observation. Then, by stepping out of that attachment to what the sage is or isn't, the sage is able to recognize that he or she is none of those things and all of those things at the same time. And that the thoughts of superiority or grandiosity or nothingness and unworthiness and non-existence of the ego and refuting and revoking all attachments to all things, when the sage realizes that none of those things and all of those things is him or her, and that they're really an experience of like a current. If you think of like a smoky room and you see all these currents of different smoke, you can see when a little sunlight comes in, or dust. And if you could look at thought forms and emotions, archetypal archetypal consciousness streams as these kind of smoky threads and streams and currents that move through the atmosphere. And again, when it comes to astrology, certain ones become stronger and they impact everybody more. But how they impact each and every person is highly dependent on that person's awareness and also if they're not aware, their receptivity to different levels, from shadow to light. And I don't know if that's really the best terms for that example, but I'm getting quite a lot off on a big tangent with this, so I don't want to go too far. So when these currents, like the current of Jupiter we'll use, who has different characteristics of diplomacy to fortune to exaggerating or exacerbating to delegating, and there's all these different, again, shadow and light, so to speak, dense versus more effervescent. I don't know, I'm kind of losing myself on those ones. I think you know what I'm saying here. There's these different types and shades of characteristics that come through with the archetype that is associated with Jupiter. And so when that's heightened, then somebody, say like the sage, can be, if he's in a place of getting swept up by the currents of the crowd, who are swept up in magnanimous reverence to the great sage, and perhaps the sage hasn't been sleeping well, or he's working through something and he's not meditating as much. He's not in his practice of being the observer and the witness, both in appreciation of what's occurring, but also in separation from it, so that the role can be played and also not lost in. And so if the sage gets lost in it, he also picks up. I mean, we're all energy, and we're emitting and receiving all these energies from those around us. And with a crowd that's bigger and bigger in reverence of his great glory, he may be like, in fact, I am quite glorious. I am a gift of God, and I am the second coming of something spectacular. And starts quoting everything from mystic Sumerians, Egyptian codes, to biblical scripture. And he got lost in his role. Nothing wrong with that. There are absolutely fantastic and important lessons within that. And yet, if he or she, the sage, was to say, I feel this, I can feel it trying to take over me, I feel I need to separate now and take time and space quiet and honor that connection that is me with my higher self and this incarnate self, then he is able to not necessarily sweep those external archetypal energies away, but the most powerful sage is able to sit with it and allow it to move through him. He goes from being a pillar to being a screen, with an ability to not only let those energies move through him, but he lets them move through him in a resonance that he holds as the screen, a resonance that transmutates the pain, the density, the limiting, the malice, the outdated, all the different things that are ready to be transmuted. That's part of his role coming down from the mountain, less than it is to speak great wisdom and prophesy great knowings. The true sage, whether he's 102 or 2.5, and we'll see this in children quite often, simply sits in their own space. Maybe they play in the dirt and they touch flowers, or they weave grass together into a bracelet, or they listen to the birds chitter-chattering in the bamboo outside. And without needing to distinguish what's being said from the birds in the bamboo, he allows the information to come through from spirit that is the assist of the transmutation. The intention is there, the sage as the screen, as the transmuter. The Fool's Embrace. What a fantastic title for this. The Fool is, in Hermeticism taught Thoreau, is the beginner's mind, the child, the no mind, no thought. He loses his mind, allows spirit to come through in all the ways it comes through, and he maintains himself as an open receptor site, receiver, and simultaneously a resonant, I want to say fidelity, there's a better word for it. We'll stick with that. A resonant truth as pure divine love and grace. And that's where spirit comes in and says, okay, you're true to your contract. We're transmuting pain or anger, which is anger is the offspring of pain anyways, or all these more limiting emotions and thoughts, and we're transmuting them because you are honoring the connection between yourself, dear sage, your higher self, your spirit self, and the lineage upwards to God and Source itself. And that lineage is a lineage, and I said upward, but it's also an inward. So to go up is to go in and to bring that presence in. And I'm not going to go there right now. That's a whole nother 30 minutes of conversation. But for many of you who know, and those who are still learning, well, we're all still learning more and more what that means to go inward, pulling up one's consciousness in a way that you not only become so embodied with a greater concentration of your soul self and pulling in fragments of the soul that has been lost during pains and traumas that occur naturally throughout the life. But in pulling that in, it starts cleaning out. It's like bringing in clean, clear. I was talking with somebody today, and I was reminding him, someone in his wisdom years, that was not understanding dehydration. Electrolytes. It's like bringing in all this water with healthy, clean, clear electrolytes and minerals, and it goes into the deepening, deeper, ever fractaling, smaller and more minute caverns of the body and the being, and cleans and clears it out. The detox. And the more that embodiment comes in, the more cleansing occurs, the more openings of those deeper and deeper and deeper still caverns of the physical, molecular, cellular, genetic, atomic, fractal, yes, but quark. I mean, the infinitesimal nature of getting smaller and smaller with any particle, the body being a grandiose conglomeration of a particle, getting smaller and smaller. The smaller you go, the bigger it is. And that's how going deeper within equates to going further and more concentrated into connection with spirit self, God, source, universe. And, wow, it feels like a stopping point. Like all of a sudden everybody just got, whew, yes. And that. One other point. This process, it feels like an ever unfolding process, like the lotus flower. And what a perfect analogy or metaphor, I'm losing the right context there, for the inverse of what's occurring. The lotus flower unfolds and unfolds and unfolds, and it's an external opening with an ever eternal internal bud that keeps blossoming and opening and blossoming and exposing more little cups of petals and flowers. And the more it exposes, those fall away and open, and the more that develop and grow outward. It's very analogous to what I was describing within. And the more that we do in the first however many stages, depending on the person and their course and their design for this particular life, we come across tension spots, and that feels like pain. And at first, it feels like a lot of pain, because it connects us not only to aspects that reside within our body that need to be opened and cleared, broken free and unwound like a wadded up, knotted piece of yarn, but those minute aspects within ourselves that are tensed and tangled, those contain shared particles actual electrons, if we're going to go science, that have touched and been embodied, processed, and moved through at a quantum level with every human, every being, everything throughout all of time. Now, if we want to go on more of a greater, more basic science level, we all recognize that water moves through us, and I think science created an algorithm to predict that what we excrete in our bodies, and when we ingest water and excrete it, it comes back to us. The molecules do, or some of them, at the latest within a 7-year period. And in that 7-year period of time, it passes through countless lives. I don't think that can really be calculated at this point. So if you consider that whether we're speaking quantumly or simply a water molecule, we share the resonant memory at multiple levels within ourselves of every joy, every elation, every great insight, every creative exploration and discovery, every trauma, every horror, every love, every fantasy, every connection. We have that within us. And the deeper we go within and explore, it accesses us to not only the extension, the projected hologram of the universe itself, it reminds us of our infinite and eternal nature. And there is a boundless recognition within that, as much as there is a requirement to stay within the incarnation, keep the presence within. And so there's a balance there too. And it can be uncomfortable for a time. And that's the transmuting pain bit. And after a time, when the pain of it, at all its many extremes and minorities, have been ridden, when you have ridden that wave of different types and different levels of excruciating pains and terrors and horrors and joys and ecstasies and all the things that come with the more deeper level of exploration within the spiritual self and the detoxing process, the stillness process. The more that's been done, the more we refine our ability to be on the playing field in the training field and be an observer of it, which then allows us to experience other people's energetic, could be also verbal and action, behavior, and so forth, but energetic inflictions towards us and upon us. They're projections. We can feel and see and hear in a different sense when an assault is coming, in a way. And I don't necessarily mean like a physical assault. That could be the case. I mean any type of insult, assault, imposition, and like the great Tai Chi masters are able to know their opponent's moves before their opponent begins making it. And you'll see the best Tai Chi masters are often the small, most unassuming ones, and they stand with their feet so solid and anchored to the ground. You couldn't take someone 3 times their weight and push them over. And when an assailant comes towards them, it's a great beautiful representation for any kind of energetic alchemy and workings. So when a physical opponent comes towards them, they're able to anticipate it, duck and move, and allow it to go by, and allow the assailant to defeat themselves with their own impetuousness, their own anger, their own overzealousness. And through that process of self-defeating, they go through their own lesson, and the Tai Chi master is able to demonstrate a mastery of war by not inflicting pain and maintaining peace and awareness, because they are so deeply connected with those inner caverns of the outer universe of Source itself. They're also able to participate in a dance of alchemy, allowing their opponent to process their rage, their pain, their ancestral trauma, the only way they know how, right? Physical fighting in this example. And the master is able to allow them to process it without hurting others, and really only hurting themselves to the extent that they try to impose harm. What a fabulous way to be both a sage and an alchemist. So when, to really bring this to a close, when you are in the presence of, either in solitary work or in the presence of another person, other people, of their insults, their verbal and energetic assaults, you can refine your discipline and become the sage of resonant truth and transmutation, both simultaneously in allowing those energies to move around you, the ones that perhaps are more than what you can or are able to or ready to transmute at the time, and then working with some of them that come through and transmute them, because of course we all know that whenever a person that does healing work, or a reader does readings, whatever type of methodology he or she would use, what they are giving is equally a lesson within themselves. So a healer who is doing healing work properly is healing something already within themselves. And if it has already been healed, they're sharing that resonance of having already done the work and transmuting it and expanding it and redistributing it. I hope that made sense. I think it got a little jumbled at the end, but maybe not. That might have come through. So that was the beautiful message that came through those cards. And really briefly, the Virtues Reflection cards. I'm not going to read the whole thing for each card, but I'll show you what words came forth. And they did want to come together to create a word in and of itself. So we've got dignity, compassion, and faith. So in the context of what I just spoke of, I'm going to read just probably the first sentence or so of each. Dignity is a sense of worthiness and respect. Compassion is a deep empathy for another, and I'm going to add first from the self so that it can be given for another. A deep empathy for the self and then another who is suffering or living with misfortune. And then faith is a relationship of trust. And I'm going to put trust as the capital T, trust. So to have dignity, the sense of self-worth, to recognize one's own sense of self-worth, regardless of what's going on in the external world that is affecting the self, making the self maybe in a destitute position or an emotional position, or all the many things that we go through. within the human playground, having that worthiness, having that self-respect that comes from a deeply rooted infusion and integration of self-compassion, of loving kindness, of going into all of those deep, dark caverns of the internal universe, those dark spaces, and pulling up those roots all the way down that go deep, deep down into the ground, pulling them up and holding them in the hand and looking at them and saying, as you're feeling it within you, that whatever the emotions and feelings and sensations and pains are, I love you. And feeling that loving kindness like you would for, a child who needed solace and needed to cuddle, or an animal that you loved or just felt connected to and is wounded or just needs comfort, and feeling that as you pull it out, that part of you, and just that loving kindness, compassion. I love you. I feel your pain. I know, I understand. Tell me more. And then listening. And then faith, the relationship of capital T, trust. Relationship is the key word. To have a relationship with the self that is deep and pervasive and enduring and eternal is to have the deepest, richest relationship with Source and the I connection. That's fantastic. So to finish off, I'm going to read our interesting Rumi from A Year with Rumi book. The interesting poem that came up / riddle. It is, according to the day, it's from May 27th. It's A Year with Rumi. The title is Certain Sunfish. If you put on shoes that are too tight and walk out across an empty plain, you will not feel the freedom of the place unless you take off your shoes. Your shoe constriction has you confined. At night before sleeping, you take off the tight shoes and your soul releases into a place it knows. Dream and glide deeper. There's 4 stanzas. Physical existence is so cramped. We grow old and bent over like embryos. 9 months passes. It is time to be born. The lamb wants to graze green daylight. There are ways of being born twice, of coming to where you fly, not individually like birds, but as the sun moves with its bride, sincerity. 3rd stanza. Loaves of bread remind us of sunlight, but when we are inside that orb, we lose interest in building ovens, in millwork and the preparation of fields before the planting. Yeah, and the 4th and final. Fish love the ocean. Snakes move like earth fish inside a mountain, well away from seawater. Certain sunfish, though, turn snakes into ocean lovers. And so it is. Thank you, my blessed friends. Until we see each other again. Much love.